Poor girl draws a picture and gives it to her boss as a gift. The millionaire looks at it for long seconds, and what he writes on the back, she will never forget. In front of the entire team, she held out the drawing with trembling hands. It was a delicate portrait, him in a suit next to his deceased mother, smiling. Silence. The millionaire raised his eyebrows, studied the image for several long seconds, and then laughed. A dry, sharp laugh. He ripped the paper in half. "Is this what you think is worth my attention?" he mocked, throwing the pieces in the trash. The sound of the ripping seemed to echo like a slap. Her co-workers looked away, embarrassed. She swallowed back tears, her eyes welling. She had drawn it with love, in secret, after work. The intention was to honor his mother, whom everyone said he missed most. But all she received was humiliation. "Go back to your place, cleaning lady. This isn't art school." And then he turned away, not noticing what she had written on the back. Hours later, when everyone had left, he returned to the living room and saw the pieces of the drawing still in the trash. Something was bothering him. He removed one of the fragments and noticed handwriting on the back. Gathering the torn pieces on his mahogany desk, he read slowly, "To Mr. Carter, who unknowingly saved my life when he paid for my mother's treatment with the company health fund. This is the only way I can say thank you." He paused. His breath caught. It didn't make sense. He'd never known who the beneficiaries of this anonymous donation were. And now this invisible cleaning lady claimed to have been one of the lives saved by her own past kindness. His heart raced. What had once been trash was now a testament to gratitude and regret. And in that moment, unbeknownst to anyone, something inside him began to break. Before continuing, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you can continue receiving our real stories. Thank you very much. The gray sky hung over Manhattan like a steel ceiling about to collapse, and inside the smoked glass skyscraper of Westfield and Carter Enterprises, the silence was as sharp as the sound of heels in the hallways. On the 37th floor, where the windows looked out onto a horizon of achievements and egos, time seemed to allow no emotions, only deadlines. Mr. Carter, the youngest CEO in the company's history, maintained a routine of almost military precision. Timed meetings, sugar-free. Coffees and no good morning wasted. He was feared, admired, and utterly alone. His presence chilled the air, his absence warmed it. On the lower floors, hidden among the floor cloths, buckets of disinfectant and emergency exits no one used, was a thin, sweet-eyed, light-footed girl named Ellie. Almost no one knew her name. She was the cleaning lady, or to the more polite, "Excuse me, miss." But she knew everyone's names. She knew who cried in the bathroom. She knew who laughed loudly to hide their fear. She knew who stayed late to hide their loneliness at home. And she knew, more than anyone, Carter's full name. Ellie had a secret ritual. Every night when the building emptied and only the sound of vacuum cleaners remained, she would pass by the CEO's office. She would pause at the glass door and gaze for a few seconds at that impeccable, minimalist cold space, as if trying to understand how anyone could live in a place where everything had a price. But nothing had a soul. One day she found a photograph on his desk, an old faded portrait of Carter, still a child, smiling beside a woman with eyes identical to his. The frame had fallen over. Ellie straightened it and unknowingly touched the open wound of a man pretending not to bleed. In the weeks that followed, she began drawing at night, in secret, inspired by that image. She used discarded paper, borrowed pencils from her stash, and her own soul as ink. She wanted to give back something no one else saw: humanity. She had no idea how to do it. Until his birthday, when she overheard there would be a small gathering at the penthouse. No one invited her, of course. But she saw it as a chance to thank him for something he hadn't even known he'd done. And so, with sweaty hands and her heart in her throat, she entered. The room was filled with laughing executives, glasses in hand. The air smelled of champagne and arrogance. She approached him, who was chatting with a select group. She held out the drawing, wrapped in a makeshift red ribbon. "I made it for you, Mr. Carter. It's of your mother. I thought you'd like it." He paused. Everyone stopped. He took the paper with disdain and opened it. For a moment, his hardened face seemed to falter, but then, with a smile that cut more than it lit, he tore the paper in two. "This is a billion-dollar company, not a kindergarten." Laughter shot out like daggers, and Ellie stood there, in front of everyone, as if she were nothing but dust on the expensive marble carpet. At the back of the room, no one noticed the coffee lady silently lower her eyes, not even the intern who clenched his fists in anger. But in that moment, everyone wondered the same thing. Why did she do that? And why did he react that way? Little did they know that the torn paper held more than a drawing. It held a memory he'd preferred to bury, and a gratitude she'd never had the courage to say out loud. Ellie's childhood was sketched in charcoal, without color or soft contours. She was born in Newark, in the poor suburbs of New Jersey, in a clapboard house where the roof leaked and the silence screamed. Her father left before she turned 5, leaving only an empty wallet and a rent debt. Her mother, Lucille, was the opposite of fragile. She worked 3 shifts, cooked with what she had, sewed her own shoes, and smiled even when her eyes cried out for rest. Ellie grew up watching her mother put out invisible fires every day, and she learned early on not to ask for anything. At 9, Ellie could already make soup with 2 ingredients. At 12, she learned to tell her mother she wasn't hungry, just so she'd eat what little she had. School was both a refuge and a prison. While escaping the chaos of home, she had to hide her worn-out clothes, recycled notebooks, and pitying looks. Even so, Ellie was sweet. She drew in notebooks, on newspaper, on the peeling bathroom walls. Anywhere would do. It was her way of breathing. But the cruelest blow came at 16. Lucille collapsed on the subway on her way to her second job. The diagnosis was cruel: advanced lymphoma. There was no health insurance. There were no relatives. There was only Ellie, a teenager with sad eyes and hands too small to hold the world. The doctors were honest. The treatment was expensive. The chances were slim, and the time was short. Ellie cried for 3 days. On the 4th day, she took a deep breath and went to a company that claimed to have an assistance fund for vulnerable families. She filled out paperwork, wrote a heartfelt letter, and waited. 2 weeks later, the response came. The treatment had been approved. No further details, no names, just a stamp. Westfield and Carter. Human Fund Ellie never knew who was behind the help. But the chemotherapy began. It was months of needles, pain, and fragile hopes. Lucille fought bravely, and even with her body weakened, she stroked her daughter's hair, saying, "One day, you will draw for the world, my love. One day, someone will see the beauty that lives in your hands." But the miracle didn't last. The illness overtook hope. Lucille passed away one silent night, clutching Ellie's drawing of the 2 of them in a non-existent field of flowers. The girl didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply drew throughout the night, as if trying to immortalize her mother in lines was the only way to keep her from disappearing. At 18, Ellie dropped out of school and began working at whatever job she could find. She washed dishes, swept empty ballrooms, and cared for elderly people who couldn't remember their own names. Until, by chance, she learned that the company that had saved her mother, Westfield and Carter, was hiring cleaning staff for a new building in Manhattan. It sounded like destiny, and she went. 3 years later, Ellie knew every corner of the building, every hidden leak, every faulty light bulb. She never told anyone why she was there. She never tried to get close. But every time she saw the name Carter engraved on the glass doors, something warmed her heart. She thought one day she could thank him, even if silently, even if with a drawing. On the last Friday of the month, an unusual buzz rippled through the halls of Westfield and Carter. It was the CEO's 35th birthday, and as usual, the board was preparing a small get-together on the penthouse floor. Nothing extravagant, but with the calculated refinement only millionaires could pull off. French champagne, an instrumental soundtrack, and guests who used words like networking as if they were prayers. Ellie learned about the event by overhearing 2 secretaries in the elevator. One said, "He doesn't even like parties, but the board insists." The other replied, "It's just a facade. Carter has been dead inside for years." Ellie pretended not to hear, but the phrase echoed in her mind as if it had struck her personally. That night, after finishing her shift, she took from her closet a simple envelope, with a red ribbon made of string and duct tape. Inside was the drawing, done over weeks, line by line. It depicted a young Carter's face next to his mother, inspired by that photograph she had seen only once, but never forgotten. The woman's gaze held a lively, maternal glow, and Carter, in the illustration, looked like a human, vulnerable boy, not the marble magnate everyone feared. In the lower right-hand corner, she had handwritten, "For those who gave me hope, even without knowing it." And on the back of the sheet, a small text, "The company health fund saved my mother. This is my way of saying thank you." Ellie spent over an hour rehearsing her delivery. She imagined shy smiles, a brief thank you, maybe a handshake. She didn't want glory. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to look him in the eye and say thank you, and then forget about it. But in that environment where every gesture was rehearsed, spontaneity was a mistake. When she reached the penthouse, she hesitated at the daughter. Classical music filled the air, and everyone wore clothes that shimmered under the lights of hanging chandeliers. Ellie was wearing her cleaning uniform, understated, clean, but invisible. Still, she walked in, eyes turned to her, some with pity, others with veiled contempt. She walked over to where Carter stood, talking with two men in grey suits. She stopped a few steps away, holding out the envelope, her hands trembling. "I made this for you. It's your mother's. I thought you'd like—" Carter, interrupted mid-sentence about stocks and earnings, looked at her as if offended. He slowly took the envelope, opened it. Silence. Everyone around him watched his reaction as if awaiting a verdict. He stared at the drawing for several long seconds. He frowned. And then, with a cold half-smile, he said, "Do you think this is appropriate? Bringing cheap sentimentality to a billion-dollar company?" He tore the paper in half and let the pieces fall slowly into the silver wastebasket. Nearby, the laughter began softly, nervously. A woman from the marketing team even tried to intervene, but backed away when she saw his sharp gaze. "You should be focusing on cleaning the floor, not playing artist." Ellie didn't answer. She didn't even cry. She just stood there. The words hurt less than the gesture. She didn't know which was worse, being invisible or being seen like this, as a mistake. And no one saw her leave through the side door. No one noticed what was written on the back of the paper, nor how much it cost her. That night, alone at home, Ellie tore up the other drawings she kept under her bed, and she vowed never to draw again. But fate doesn't like promises made in pain. The next day, rain fell on New York with the same force that Carter's words had fallen on Ellie. The sky seemed to weep for her, and each drop hitting the city's windows carried a piece of the pain she couldn't express. Ellie arrived earlier than usual. She avoided meeting the eyes that had seen her humiliated the night before. She changed her clothes in silence, grabbed her cleaning cart, and began walking through the empty hallways. But something was different. On the 37th floor, the glass door to Carter's office was ajar. That never happened. He was known for his obsession with control, privacy, and perfection. Ellie hesitated. Something in the air seemed less cold. She placed her hand on the side of the door, pushed gently, and stepped inside. Carter was there, sitting in the dark. Leather chair, elbows on his knees, head bowed, holding in his hands the pieces of the drawing he had salvaged from the trash. She froze. She didn't want to be there. She didn't want to see him. But it was too late. He looked up, for the first time without arrogance, without a mask, just a lost man, a man faced with something he couldn't name. "It was you, wasn't it?" he asked in a low, almost hoarse voice. Ellie didn't answer. She just stood there, her heart pounding in her ears. "My mother. That drawing you made without ever having met her, but her look was the same. How did you know?" She took a deep breath. "Because I had a mother who looked at me the same way." He blinked slowly. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. Carter set the pieces on the table as if they were relics. "I shouldn't have done that." "No, Mr. Carter, you shouldn't." There was a long silence, and then he said, "Why did you give me this?" She bit her lip before answering. "Because Westfield and Carter saved my mother. The relief fund had paid for the treatment. I never knew who approved it. I never got to thank you. When I saw that picture of your mother on your desk, I thought I could give back with what I know how, but I didn't know it would be offensive." He stood still, and for a moment he looked like a boy at his mother's grave, trying to find a word he never said. "You said my company saved your mother, but I didn't do that. I mean, I approved the fund, sure, but I never looked at the names. I always thought it didn't matter. It mattered to me." That sentence pierced him like an arrow. Ellie lowered her eyes. She was ready to leave when he stood up. "Hopefully." She stopped at the door. "Do you still have other drawings?" She didn't answer. She just looked into his eyes, and in that instant, Carter understood everything. She knew more than he ever had about gratitude. But there were no more words. Ellie left, and he remained, alone with the pieces of paper in his hands, for the first time, unsure of what to do with his own silence. Monday arrived like a sharp blade. What should have been just another start to the week at Westfield and Carter became a subtle stage for whispers and sideways glances. The story of the cleaner who crashed her boss's party with a children's drawing was already circulating through the halls like a modern legend. No one knew the details, but everyone had a version. Some said she was in love with Carter. Others said she was an opportunist trying to get attention, and many, even without malice, saw her simply as someone who had overstepped her bounds. At the morning general meeting, Ellie was called into HR. The polite corporate coordinator explained in soothing tones that, for breach of protocol and inappropriate exposure of personal conduct in front of executives, she was being terminated. No scolding, no scandal, just washed-out words, like someone removing a stain without raising dust. Ellie didn't cry. She just listened, signed the papers and returned to the locker room. There she put away her badge, folded her uniform gently, and left it on the bench. But before leaving, she passed Carter's office one more time. The door was closed. She didn't knock. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't think there was anything more to say, but on the other side of the door, Carter knew. And he did nothing. The next day, the group of executives who had attended the party returned to their routines. But the memory of the scene lingered. The marketing assistant, who witnessed the entire thing, could no longer look at Carter the same way. The intern, who never spoke to anyone, wrote an anonymous message on the company's internal forum. There is no innovation without humanity, and sometimes greatness lies not in the billions we generate, but in the lives we touch without realizing it. Yesterday I saw a drawing being torn, but I also felt a heart being broken. The post went viral among employees. Without naming names, everyone understood the reference, and comments began to emerge, reports of other actions by the CEO, an unnecessary scolding here, a public humiliation there, people resigning without saying why. Carter didn't react. He just watched. Deep down he knew this wasn't about Ellie. It was about him, about how power had hardened him to the point of destroying a pure gesture coming from the one person who wanted nothing in return. Days later, the communications team proudly announced a new program supporting young artists from underserved communities. Carter wasn't present at the launch, but he requested that an entire room in the building be transformed into a quiet gallery, and hanging there, among white frames and discreet lights, was a single drawing. Patched with tape on the back, the erasure mark still visible but intact. Him and his mother, side by side. The caption was simple, from someone who knew how to thank before being seen. But Ellie wasn't there to see it anymore. The morning after her dismissal, Ellie was wandering aimlessly through the streets of Brooklyn, backpack on, headphones in, but no music. Just silence, the kind of silence that screams. The city pulsed around her like a racing heart, but inside her everything was suspended. She sat on a park bench, opened the old notebook she always carried, and flipped through the blank pages. For the first time since her mother's death, She didn't feel like drawing. Not because she lacked inspiration, but because something had broken, as if her art had been disavowed by those who held the power to define value. However, that same afternoon, while walking down a street near the old public school where she had studied, she saw something that made her stop. A graffiti mural on the side wall created by a local collective of young artists. It was vibrant, strong, defiant, and there, in the lower corner, a detail caught her eye. A small, feminine face with tired eyes, very similar to the one she had drawn of her own mother. And then, almost without thinking, Ellie entered the building next door, which served as a cultural center. Inside, she found a group of teenagers painting murals on craft paper taped to the walls. One of them, a boy with colorful hair and a baggy jacket, recognized her. "You're the girl from the Post, right? The one with the ripped drawing." She froze. She didn't know how it had gotten there. "Sorry," he said. "It's just everyone here was talking about you after that message board post. Someone from the company posted it anonymously, and it got back to us." Her heart sank. She tried to run away, but he interrupted her. "We thought it was beautiful. You made the coldest CEO in New York seem human. That's art." Ellie almost laughed, but she didn't. Because it hurt. Because deep down, I still hoped Carter had done something. Anything. An apology. A gesture. A message. But his silence was the loudest answer. It was then that she decided she wouldn't go back. Not if he sought her out. Not if he offered money. Not if she shed tears. She had already poured her all into that paper. What he did with it was his. But what she did with what was left was her choice. And so he picked up a brush and began painting again. Not for himself. Not for anyone. But for her. Carter, at that very moment, was in his office, reading for the third time the text that was now circulating inside and outside the company. There was something. In that sentence, she tore the paper, but she also tore the gesture, that hurt like a knife. He searched for her name in the records. He found her address in the system, but he hesitated. He considered calling, writing, asking her to come back. But he knew deep down that he had crossed a line, that it wasn't about inviting her back, but about becoming someone worthy of being found again. What he didn't know is that she had already understood this, and that was precisely why she didn't expect anything anymore, because she knew. And knowing was everything. Carter's office was plunged into darkness. The half-open blinds let the late afternoon light filter through in streaks, as if even the sun hesitated to touch him. He stared at the computer screen but read nothing. The cursor blinked white, taunting him. On the other side of the desk lay the restored pieces of the drawing he had rescued from the trash. He had tried to tape them together with clear tape, like someone trying to glue something they don't know how to fix. But the creases were still there, irreversible. It was then that he decided to search the company's internal records, the aid fund's files. After breaking 2 protocols and demanding administrative access to confidential data, he found what he was looking for: Lucille Grace Bennett. Approved. Amount: $124,800. Status: deceased. Responsible party: Elijah Carter. Direct signature: 3 years ago. Carter's eyes widened. He vaguely remembered that night, the night when, in a rare burst of humanity, he decided to personally sign some orders that had been overlooked by accounting. He'd had a few drinks, listening to jazz in his mother's living room, feeling her absence more than the weight of the world. He didn't know what moved him, but he signed the papers almost impulsively. One name among many. He hadn't imagined that among them was Ellie's mother. On the screen was an attachment, a handwritten letter. He clicked, and when the scanned file opened, his eyes fluttered. It was delicate, almost childlike handwriting. Ellie's letter. Dear Westfield and Carter Management, my name is Ellie Bennett. I'm 17 years old. I know you help people with serious illnesses, and I know my mom might not survive, but I had to try. She's all I have, everything. I promise I'll repay that with hard work. Or if I can't, I promise to use my gift, drawing, to give back to the world the kindness you give me. I don't know where else to ask. Help me, please." He couldn't finish reading. A lump formed in his throat. He got up, went to the window, and leaned his forehead against the glass. Everything made sense now. Her silent presence, her discreet gaze, the drawing, the motif, the weight. That wasn't just gratitude. It was a lifetime being returned in traces. And he destroyed it. For the first time in years, Carter felt ashamed of himself. A shame he couldn't wash away with donations or press releases. It was the kind of shame you only feel when you realize you've hurt someone you just wanted to thank. He grabbed his phone, opened the messaging app, searched for Ellie Bennett. Nothing. He searched the HR system and found his old contact address, Brooklyn, a neighborhood he'd never been to. The next day, disguised in a cap and dark coat, he walked the humble streets of her neighborhood. He stopped at the worn wooden gate. He knocked. Nothing. He asked the neighbor, "Oh, Ellie, I think she's at a cultural center nearby, the one that helps. The art kids." And there he went. Arriving downtown, she noticed a group of young people painting through the window. And in the corner, like a calm beacon amidst the colorful chaos, she sat on the floor, drawing with a small girl beside her, giggling softly. He didn't go in. He didn't have the courage. He just stood there, watching, seeing for the first time who she really was. And there, on the other side of the glass, without her seeing him, Carter discovered who she was, and who he had stopped being. The next day, Carter returned to the cultural center, this time without disguise. He wore a simple sweater, without the tailored suits or the Swiss watch that marked his status like a social stamp. As he entered, the noise of conversations, brushes scraping paper, and teenage laughter took him out of the concrete universe he inhabited daily. Here, everything was alive, organic, imperfect, and therefore real. He asked for Ellie, a young woman with dreadlocks and a paint-stained blouse, pointed to a staircase in the back. "She's up there, children's illustration workshop." He thanked her and climbed it with his heart pounding, but when he reached the top, the room was empty. Only a girl was drawing alone at the table. He approached. "Have you seen Ellie?" The girl looked up. She was about 7. "She's gone." "Away? What do you mean?" He said he needed to breathe away. "Do you know where she went?" The girl shook her head. "She only told me one thing, that sometimes, when we draw a lot with a broken heart, we need to let it rest for a while." Carter felt the ground sink. In the following days, he tried to find clues. He went to the old building where she lived. Empty. He asked on social media. He searched through records, nothing. Ellie had disappeared like a leaf in the wind, and now he discovered the weight of her absence. At the office, every corner of the company reminded him of her. The staircase where he'd seen her smile once as she picked up a fallen, colored pencil. The room where he'd humiliated her. The trash can where he'd thrown more than one drawing. The heart of someone who just wanted to say, "Thank you." He began canceling meetings. He declined invitations. He ordered all the expensive artwork removed from the hallways, and instead requested enlarged copies of the work Ellie had left in the company system, sketches, forgotten drawings, saved in backups, which no one ever appreciated. Employees began to notice. Something in him had changed. He stopped interrupting people in meetings. He began to listen. Sometimes he would stand for long minutes in front of the board with the patched drawing, a symbolic gesture that everyone silently respected. In the media, journalists asked why he had disappeared from the public eye, why he had declined the Businessman of the Year award, why Westfield and Carter had cancelled 3 major international contracts, resulting in obscene profits and environmental impacts. But he didn't explain. He just let the world think. Meanwhile, Ellie, she walked aimlessly down roads. She passed through Albany, then Buffalo. She worked as an assistant at a community library, then as a drawing tutor at a public school. She lived simply, almost invisibly, but she breathed. "I no longer drew to be accepted. I drew to heal. And I never imagined that, while sleeping in rented rooms and eating in forgotten cafes, a powerful man in a glass tower in Manhattan was relearning how to miss someone, not out of pride, not out of public regret, but for silent love, a love that came too late to be declared in words, and soon enough to transform a soul. Weeks turned into months, and Carter's empire, once indestructible, began to crack, not from financial failure, but from a crisis no number could fix: the loss of human trust. The anonymous report about the cartoon episode had leaked to the press. Smaller alternative media outlets began reprinting it with provocative headlines. Billionaire destroys former. Cleaning lady's gratitude with a tear. And like gunpowder, indignation ignited. Carter didn't defend himself. He didn't issue an official statement. He didn't hire crisis advisors. He simply remained silent. But silence, in this case, felt like a confession. A group of independent artists came together and painted a symbolic mural on a Manhattan wall, a young woman in a cleaning lady's uniform holding a torn piece of paper. In the background, crumbling skyscrapers. The impact was immediate. Passers-by took photos and posted them with hashtags like the torn drawing and silent gratitude and poetic justice. The image went viral. Investors began to question whether Carter was still the ideal face to represent a company with a pretense of social responsibility. Some insiders demanded his temporary resignation as CEO. Shares plummeted. Opinion columns accused Westfield and Carter of inhumane corporatism. Carter was called to a press conference. Everyone expected the standard response. Measured phrases, promises of change, symbolic donations. But what they saw was an exhausted, visibly affected man, wearing a wrinkled jacket and with red-rimmed eyes. "I have no justification, nor sufficient excuses. I was arrogant. I tore up more than paper. I tore up the most sincere gesture anyone has ever offered me." There was a tense silence in the room. Reporters looked at each other. No one expected such vulnerability. "I'm stepping down from my position, not because I was forced to, but because I need to truly learn what it means to respect a heart. Because I destroyed one." The backlash was immediate. Some criticized him for his theatrics, others for his tardiness. But many saw something rare: a millionaire being human, perhaps for the first time. Meanwhile, far away, Ellie watched the press conference video on a borrowed cell phone. She was sitting in the back of a public school where she was now helping children draw their own stories. She didn't smile or cry. She just put her phone aside and said to the girl next to her, "Now draw what you feel, not what they expect of you." And he started coloring again. Carter, back in his empty apartment, pulled an old letter from the drawer, Ellie's letter to the relief fund. He read it again, and for the first time he responded, with ink, paper, and trembling hands. Carter disappeared from the spotlight. No cameras followed him, no business columnists got any new information. The Long Island mansion was put up for sale. The Manhattan apartment was locked for weeks. Everyone assumed he had fled, hiding out in some luxurious European resort, as powerful people often do when they make mistakes. But he didn't. In his first days away from office, Carter wandered through neighborhoods he'd never been to before. He walked into small coffee shops, overheard mundane conversations, and sat on park benches next to lonely old men. He began writing in lined notebooks he bought at pharmacies, shapeless sketches, words he didn't know lived inside him. The walls of his home, once covered in minimalist art and cold frames, were now covered in doodles, collages, and attempts at drawing. Carter discovered he didn't know how to hold a pencil properly, but he drew anyway, every day, not for the result, but for the pain. It was on one of those days that he returned to Westfield and Carter headquarters, not as CEO but as a visitor. He asked to enter the gallery he had silently commissioned months earlier, the one displaying only Ellie's patched-up drawing. He stood there motionless before the image. He observed his mother's face, her childlike face, the features she had captured with impossibly high precision. He sat on the bench next to him, and he cried, not as someone who laments, but as someone who finally understands what they never understood, the difference between being admired and being worthy of love. When he left an envelope with the receptionist. Inside, there was only one letter. Ellie, today, I understand that you gave me a gift that I tore apart inside. I spent my life trying to prove my worth to the world, without realizing that value lies in gestures that don't shine. Your drawing was more than art. It was forgiveness disguised as gratitude. I'm learning to draw, I'm still terrible at it, but every time the pencil touches the paper, I remember what I lost, and who taught me what it means to be truly seen. Wherever you are, thank you. Carter. He left the city quietly. He took an overnight train upstate, with no specific destination in mind. He told his few friends that he needed to live with fewer mirrors and more windows. In my backpack, I carried my sketchbook, Ellie's patched-up drawing, and a new life. Ellie, meanwhile, began noticing anonymous notes left in the cultural center's mailbox. Small pieces of paper with simple drawings drawn with clumsy but intense hands. A face, a tree, a field of flowers, and always with a phrase at the end, I'm still learning to... See, she knew, I knew who it was. But he didn't answer, because sometimes silence is also love. It was an ordinary afternoon, with a dull sky and a light breeze, that Ellie decided to take the children from the cultural center to draw in the park. They spread white sheets of paper on the grass, opened worn pencil cases, and let their little eyes see the world freely. She walked among them, correcting postures, encouraging strokes, smiling genuinely. And then, she felt it. He didn't see. He didn't hear. He just felt like a familiar wind crossing time. He turned around slowly. There, a few feet away, standing among the trees as if the world had slowed down around him, was Carter. No suit, no wall, no rush. He wore jeans and a wrinkled shirt, his hair a little longer, his face with softer lines. In his eyes, something she had never seen before. Truth. For a moment, neither of them moved. The park continued to breathe. Birds, children's laughter, leaves dancing. But between them, everything stopped. Carter took 2 steps, hesitantly, as if he didn't want to invade, as if he didn't want to repeat the mistake of occupying a space that didn't belong to him. Ellie, on the other hand, stood her ground. She didn't run. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, with the same calmness with which she had handed over the drawing. He held out his hand. There was an envelope. She didn't catch on right away. She looked into his eyes. It's not an apology, Carter said, his voice low. It's an invitation. She arched her eyebrow. I opened an art house in Syracuse, for children, young people, people who draw with what they have. I want your name on the entrance. She lowered her eyes, her heart pounding with silent fury in her chest. Not to fix anything, he continued, but to start something, wherever you decide. She took the envelope. She didn't open it. I didn't come to seek forgiveness, he said, his voice low. I came to thank you. Truly. Ellie's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. Behind her, a child tugged at her shirt. Aunt Ellie, look at my drawing. She turned. She knelt. She smiled. And when she looked back, he was still there, but now, just waiting. No demands, no promises, just there, present, for the first time. Ellie didn't respond that day. He simply pocketed the envelope and returned to tending to the children. When he looked up again, Carter was gone. No goodbye wave, no theatrical gesture, just his presence. Like an echo that had finally learned to silence itself at the right time. For days she avoided opening the envelope. She was afraid. Afraid the invitation was too real. Afraid hope would be reborn and die again. But one cold night, to the sound of soft rain on the window, she lit a candle on the desk of the small house she now rented. She sat down and opened it. Inside, a sketch made by him. Clumsy, crooked, lacking in proportions. But there was emotion. There were 2 characters, a girl, sitting, drawing, and a man in the background standing, watching with empty hands and full eyes. Below a handwritten sentence, "I'm still learning to draw, but it's with you that I learn to see." She placed the drawing on the table and closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. And then, for the first time in a long time, she felt forgiveness approaching, not as a noble or superior gesture, but as liberation. Days later, Ellie left for Syracuse. He took an interstate bus with his backpack on his back, his notebook on his lap, and the envelope in his pocket. Arriving in the city, he smelled the countryside, wet earth, dry leaves, and a slower air. The art house was housed in a renovated former school. The facade was simple, with a carved wooden sign, "Casa Bennett, where gestures become lines." She stopped. She touched the wood. And then he entered. Carter was there. He was helping two children paint a wall, paint stained, laughing, no suit, no disguise. When he saw her, he didn't run. He just smiled. A small, embarrassed but genuine smile. She walked up to him and handed him a new envelope. Inside, a drawing, this time she and he, sitting side by side, paintbrushes in hand. No backdrop of skyscrapers, just an open field and sunshine. He opened it. He read on the back, "It's not goodbye, but it's not a new beginning either. It is what it is." And she looked him in the eyes. "I accept the invitation, but not as an employee, not as charity, not as a trophy of redemption." How? Then, as someone who knows the value of what they do, and who learned not to ask permission to exist. He nodded, silently. And then, she walked into the room. She picked up a crayon, and he began to teach. A year later, a quiet exhibition took shape in a low-key gallery in upstate New York. There was no advertising, no million-dollar sponsorship, just a simple sign at the entrance, "Invisible Lines, Stories Nobody Saw." Among the paintings on display, made by children, young people, and street artists, there was a single unsigned piece, a patched drawing with the still visible marks of the paper that had once been ripped in half. Beside it, a small wooden plaque, without a caption, no text, no explanation. During opening night, Carter passed silently among the visitors. He wore simple clothes. He observed unhurriedly. At one point, he stopped in front of the drawing. He stood there, motionless, for several minutes. Ellie watched him from afar, leaning against the opposite wall. Her, arms crossed and a faint smile on her lips. She didn't approach. She didn't call out to him. She just watched him. And he, feeling her gaze, did not turn around. He just closed his eyes. And he smiled too. Outside the gallery, the wind gently blew through the trees. A child ran with a piece of paper in his hand, laughing, as drops of paint ran down the sides of the sidewalk. Inside, no music played, but every painting was sound, and every silence was history. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched your heart in some way. So tell me in the comments, what part gave you the most chills or made you think? I read everything with care. Don't forget to like it. It really helps spread stories like this on YouTube, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of emotion, poetic justice, and unexpected twists. And look, there's a new video playing here on the screen right now. Click and watch. The next story might impact you even more. See you there.